Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you also very much for giving me the opportunity here to learn and to see really developments at the front of the know-how. Because what I'm now presenting is maybe a different coin of all what we have discussed. The morning Stephen showed a slide where I think Britain was not doing too well in terms of industry contribution to the GDP. I think it came down from 20% to maybe now 12 or something like this. We, UNIDO, we are dealing with developing countries. We have 151 member states, we have about 650 staff members, and we have 46 field offices. Last December, all our member states gave us, in a way, the renewed mandate of inclusive and sustainable industrial development. In the past, it was industrial development. But of course, it became clear it should be sustainable and maybe also inclusive. We work mainly in technical cooperation, analytical and policy advice, standard setting and compliance, and knowledge transfer and networking. And maybe what is important, since June 2013, we have a new Director General. It's Mr. Li Yong from China. And it will maybe give you then a little bit some linkage to what we are doing at the moment. Now, if we go first of all to see what is the global situation. When you can see here, that is the global material attraction over the time, everything is going up, up, up. Energy consumption, water consumption, material consumption. We will have very soon 2 billion people more on this planet, so it will all grow and grow. All of us want to have growth. But do you think it's sustainable? Do you think it can go on like this forever? Because our planet is a closed system. So I think, we have to think about how to solve the problem at the source. Here you can see GDP and resource consumption. You can see it's a very clear correlation, absolutely clear. And look at this, India is here, China is only here, Brazil is already here, and here are all our, where we all want to go is the living standard of USA. That's material consumption per head and year. If you multiply this figure with 9 billion people, you will realize something will not work out. Definitely it will not work out. Not to be pessimistic, but I think that's for clear. Or here, what is also quite amazing, the regional resource consumption per capita. You can see Australia and Oceania, because of their mining, of course, they are about 35 tons per head and year. And you can see the rest. The red line is about what we think, or what science tells us would be sustainable. It's about 6 tons per head and year. We have only Africa has a little bit space to grow. The rest is already overshooting. Or here, this is a graph from the World Business Council for Sustainable Industries. You can see here in 2000, it is the baseline scenario. What you can see here is the energy consumption, and here you can see the very poor people, middle class, and rich people, the distribution on our planet. If we take this as 2050, we take the same distribution of rich, poor, and very poor people, energy consumption will grow by about 60%. But nobody wants to have it. And we heard already in the morning that the middle class in India or in China is growing. People are getting out of poverty. That's what we all want and plan to do. If we are a little bit successful and the very poor people, really we can help these people, the energy consumption will double, factor of 2. And if we are even more successful, and if we would have lifestyles similar to what we enjoy here in the Western world, the energy consumption will triple till 2020. That will be a challenge. And here again, when you look at the differences between the different regions, you can see Bangladesh, Africa are far below this 2000 watt society, which we think would be sustainable. That should be the world average, and you can see all the Western countries are far above. So we are using far too much energy, all of us, no exception. Industry is and will play a very important role. I mean, it is, the machine to create wealth and to create jobs. So not one single country at the moment on this planet is not planning to do more for industrialization. All our clients, all our developing countries want to build up bigger industry. But the same industry is consuming about 1/3 of the whole energy on the planet because of very outdated, inefficient production facilities. They are using far too much water, energy, material per ton of product. A very simple example, Swedish companies are using between 2 and 4 cubic meter waters to produce 1 ton of paper. I worked in Vietnam for several years. Companies in Vietnam were using between 80 and 120 cubic meters. We had in some cases companies using 200 cubic meters per 1 ton of paper. That's incredible waste of water, energy, material. Industry is contributing about 1/3 to the CO2 emissions of the whole planet, so they play a very important role in the climate change. They are consuming about 20% of the global water use, and of course, more or less, the biggest part of material is going to the industry. They are, of course, not only emitting CO2, they are also emitting other greenhouse gases, and they are producing about 4 million tons of industrial waste every year, and most of this waste is not treated in a proper way, it is just dumped somewhere in the landscape. So I think it's very clear that the current model of the industrial production of our economy is absolutely not sustainable. It's not sustainable, and it's definitely not a model for the future. So we have to change something. But how and what can we change? Here you can also see on a global level, of course, industry plays in GDP a very remarkable role. In some of the countries like China, I think the GDP is about 60% of the whole economy. So the challenge, and I think also the opportunity for new businesses, for new ideas, is what we call decoupling. What do we mean? Well, decoupling, we mean, that we will have growth, and we need to have growth, because everybody wants to have a better life. So we have, in a way, to decouple our health, income, quality of life from the consumption of natural resources and from the emissions to the environment. It can't be that these two things are, in a way, linked together and going up and up and up forever, because this is not possible. Or what the International Resource Panel published 2 years ago is this decoupling of economic growth from the natural resource consumption and the negative environmental impacts. By the way, when we are talking about environmental impacts at the moment, everybody is talking about climate change, which is true, but climate change is only one indicator of something which is going wrong. We still have huge problems with groundwater pollution, surface water pollution. We have biodiversity loss everywhere. We have a problem with the waste production. So climate change is only one indicator. It's a very important indicator, but these things are connected to each other, and though overall, the environmental situation on a globe is still becoming worse and worse. So this decoupling, in a way, should be our challenge. And I think it would be also in a way, opportunity for research and development to come up with new ideas. It's already happening a bit. You can see here the material consumption over the years, over the last 200 years, was not anymore completely parallel to the GDP. It changed around in the 70s when companies, where also more services were starting to contribute to the GDP. So we had some sort of a relative decoupling, but not an absolute decoupling. What we also have to know that, here in the Western world, we hear quite often that countries like UK or Germany became very clean. They have clean technologies already. So they are already, in a way, decoupling economic growth from the consumption of natural resources. That's true in a way. It's true that they have a relative decoupling, but they also have solved part of their problem by outsourcing old and outdated or energy-intensive technology industries and so on. You can see it here. This is a graph which shows you the ecological footprint of a country. It's my country, Switzerland. And you can see over there, the bar is here, this is generated by households, and this is the green bar is what the ecological footprint in our country from the industry. That's what we are talking all the time in the UNFCCC negotiation about greenhouse gas emissions also. But when we add our trade, what is embedded, ecological footprint, which is embedded in our products, which we are importing, raw materials and so on, we have to add this bar. Of course, you have to deduct what we export, that's true, but what you see here, suddenly, in a way, the ecological footprint of our country is 200% of what we just generate in our own country. So that would be the real statistics. And as long as in the UNFCCC countries do not agree to negotiate on this basis, as long this is not happening, there will be no agreement. I'm 100% sure. That will be a deadlock forever. Because why should countries take over all the responsibility for this part here? We'll never do it. So what do we think, or what we in UNIDO plan to do in the next few years? First of all, and we started already 20 years ago, is the greening, or what we call greening of existing industries. So, these are few of the steps we plan to do. I will come back to one of these definitions of green industry, but one part is greening of existing industries, or what we talk here about resource efficiency in industries, or what we called 20 years ago, the UN was cleaner production, and it was, by the way, based on the pollution prevention approach of the USA. And it started after the first Rio conference in '92. The next step, I think, should be, we have really to look how can we dematerialize our economy? How can we reduce the material footprint of processes and products through, for example, new business models? We have tested for the last 7 years what we call chemical leasing approach, where companies are not anymore buying the chemicals, but they are in a way paying for the service. And so the company who is producing the chemicals, for example, organic solvents, keep the solvent and do it. And in all of the cases, we can see that the consumption of these materials to do the same service is reduced by 20 to 50%. The companies who own the solvent, produce the solvent, also know how to recycle it, how to clean it up and sell it again, or if not, they know how to dispose it in a proper way. So there we can see, just for chemicals now, we see a huge opportunity to move away more to this leasing approach. Of course, also the eco-design or the redesign of the products can make a huge difference. And then, of course, closing the material loop by this circular economy. So whatever, I will come back to this, whatever we can't recycle or can't reuse has to be the material has to be recycled. What we also see that in many of these countries, Africa, Latin America, but also Asia, green industries are missing. So they do not have high-quality consulting companies or engineering or re-engineering companies. They are missing recycling companies who really know how to do the job, how to do it in an efficient way. They do not know They don't have waste treatment, because you always will have waste and wastewater. You need proper wastewater treatment plants and so on. So that's what we call green industries, or also companies producing, for example, renewable energy equipment and so on. This sector offers huge also job opportunities. Huge opportunities to create jobs, decent jobs, if the companies are doing it in a proper way, and I think this should be much more promoted. The last point, I think, is a fundamental issue, but personally I don't understand, and I will show it you, why do we focus permanently, but maybe it's because I'm a chemist, why do we focus permanently on labor productivity? Why? And you can see labor productivity all the time increased over the last 150 years, absolutely in parallel with the labor costs. So maybe because labor productivity increased, they had to pay more for service, or the other way around. But they went up in absolutely parallel. On the same time, energy and material productivity increased much less. No focus on it. But why do we focus permanently on labor productivity where we have everywhere unemployment? And on the other hand, we do not focus on energy productivity or material productivity, and we have problems everywhere with resource scarcity and energy scarcity. I think, in my view, it would be time to shift from labor productivity to material and energy productivity. But maybe this later. So we started with what we call resource efficient and cleaner production. This is defined in the UN as a continuous application of a preventive environmental strategies to processes, products and services to increase efficiency and reduce risk to humans and to the environment. As I mentioned before, we started to build up what we call cleaner production centers in developing countries in 1994. So far, we have built up about between 45 and 50 centers. Why do I say 45, between 45 and 50? Because 2 or 3 centers we do not know anymore exactly how good they are functioning, if they are just existing on paper or not. In some of the countries, of course, it's very difficult to run such a center. So these centers, we do a lot of programs, but we also have to see and we have to acknowledge that, the actual implementation, the application of this concept in the SMEs, and we have thousands, hundreds of thousands of SMEs, millions of SMEs in all these countries, is still very low. So it needs some new methods or ideas to scale up. Because we will have no impact for this absolute decoupling if only a few case studies we have for each country. We would need to have at least 80% of all companies are doing what we call cleaner production in a systematic, continuous way for really to have an impact on this decoupling. And we are far away from this. And there is a huge opportunity. I think most of you know this is McKinsey study, which in last year published these results. About $3 trillion savings could be made if everybody would go as much as possible for resource efficiency in 2030. So it's a huge potential. So it makes absolutely business sense. It's not only because of the environment, it makes business sense. And up to 85 or 80% of these savings are possible in developing countries or economies in transition, like India, Brazil, Mexico, China, and Russia. And again, these are data from the Germans, and you can see over the time, here's the blue, these are the labor costs in the production industry, and they are in the area of 20%. Material and energy costs are about 40 to 55%. But if you ask somebody to reduce the production costs, the first thing they always do is to kick out labor. They always go after the labor costs, and they never realize, and the Germans, and Germany is quite an efficient country, they estimate that 20% of the energy and material costs could be saved without any big investment, just by doing it in a proper way. It's 20%. Or here, this is from IFC, International Finance Corporation, a study on the steel industry in Russia. And you can see the green ones is the costs in Germany, and then you have the yellow one, what would be in theory the costs in Russia to produce steel. So it would mean at the end, the production costs in Russia should be about 65% of the production costs in Germany. But actually, they are more or less the same. They are 96%. If you build in the quality, then they are the same. Why? Because here the Russians are using 40% more energy per ton of steel, 12 times more water per ton of steel, and they are using 3.6 times more sand to do the molding of the steel. So they are losing around $3 billion just because they are inefficient. Just because they are inefficient. So it would make real sense to do it more efficient way. So to scale up, we have, together with UNEP, I would like to make this very clear, we work here together with UNEP, United Nations Environmental Protection Agency, though we do also the program together. We have set up a new, what we call resource efficient and cleaner production network, which is independent from us. We are just helping them to run it. The members are also paying a membership fee, so they should be financially sustainable over the time. And you can see that so far we have now 66 centers, because we are opening the network also for institutions which were not built up by us, but are working in the same field. And so the network is now growing very fast. I think in about 1 year we will have 100 centers, where we really hope, first of all, to have more political weight, but also to have more clients where we can spread the information and make more raise the awareness, so then we can really increase our impact. I think this is quite clear, and comes also, by the way, is very much promoted from UK. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is to go away from the linear economy to a circular economy. But only within EU, there are a few countries where all 100% of the waste is still going to the landfill. There is zero recycling. That's only in the EU. If you look at it on a global scale, it is of course completely different. And it makes, again, it makes business sense. You can see here all the energy savings you gain when you are using recycled material compared to virgin material. In aluminium, it's about 90% to produce the same product in aluminium if you use recycled aluminium as raw material compared to new aluminium. And of course, it would also be a huge contribution to the climate change discussion. And here we can see how good or how bad we are in metal recycling. You can see here all the ones which are red, the recycling rate is below 1%. By the way, all the rare earths are red. So, I mean, they are rare, and we do not even recycle them. I think the problem is already on the table. Challenge of scaling up. Well, what do we think and why do we think? I mean, it makes business sense. So why companies are not doing it themselves? Why do we have to help them? Why do we have to push them? Why do we have to convince them all the time? Well, here we have some ideas, but I don't have the absolute correct answer. If I would know it, of course we would do it, and then most probably we would be also much more successful. So first of all, it's a capacity deficit. People simply don't know. They are not aware, and they are not thinking in this direction. 20 years ago, Dow Chemicals was pushed to do what they call pollution prevention by US EPA, and now they proudly present every year in their annual report that they are saving between $1 and $2 billion because of their pollution prevention or cleaner production program. And they admit they needed to have somebody from outside to make them aware of this inefficiency. And then they started to implement it and also to make it as a top management priority. But now, of course, when you compare this to all these different SMEs, the FSMEs who just try to survive, they are not aware of all this. So it's an awareness-raising problem. It's, of course, an information dissemination problem. It's a capacity-building problem. Then we have, in many countries, we have legal barriers. The environmental laws, for example, have contradiction in it. In many countries, still emission standards are based on concentration, not on the load. Now, concentration gives you absolutely no incentive, for example, to reduce the water consumption, because if you reduce the water consumption, suddenly your concentration is going up for some of the, let's say, heavy metals, then you have to do something. And, of course, financial incentives or disincentives. Here, capacity, as I said, missing awareness, lacking of technical cleaner production expertise about the industry engineers. It's amazing that still a lot of universities are training engineers, chemists, but also economists, and they are not mentioning anything about resource efficiency, resource scarcity, or cleaner production. It's still only done in a very few, principally in a very few universities, which is amazing. And as I said, it's not really considered as a multiple discipline. Economists and engineers should sit together, and they have to optimize the production process. And when they do it, they are quite successful. But this way of thinking or type of thinking is not very general. We see, of course, in many, many countries, a weak enforcement of environmental laws. And that's a fundamental problem. If environmental laws, standards are not really enforced, there is no real motivation for companies to do something. Then, as I said, we have these contradictions, load versus concentration in some cases. In some cases, permissions. If you have a permission for a certain production process and you want to change it, you have to go through the whole system again, which is very cumbersome. And of course, we have also a lot of environmentally harmful subsidies. Energy is not paid or has not a proper price. Water is completely free. During my time in Vietnam, most of the state-owned companies at the end of the year, if they had a bad year, they decided not to pay the energy bill, and they didn't pay. And the government did nothing. And every company who had their own groundwater well could pump water free as much as they wanted, with the result, of course, that in many of the places, the groundwater table was going down, 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 and creating a huge problem. But nobody, when I came and presented them options how to save, to reduce the water consumption, they were not really interested. Only after some time discussing with the government introduced a wastewater fee. And then suddenly the same companies were knocking our door asking for help, because then they got quite a nice bill for their wastewater. Financial problems. I mentioned this, focused on labor costs rather than resource efficiency. What we also see in many of the countries, banking sector does not understand the resource efficiency approach. It's much easier to get a loan if you tell the person, I will double my production capacity, but if you go to a bank and tell him, I will double my production efficiency, you will not get money. I'm 100% sure. Then, of course, in many cases, we mentioned it, natural resources are not priced in a correct and fair manner. What we hear again and again, water has to be cheap because, a family with 5 children needs to have free or cheap water, which I fully understand. But there is a difference between a family with 5 children and a paper mill. And I think it's a big difference, and it's not such a big thing to make a difference in the price for a family and for a paper mill. So, social policy should be not done for industries, for companies. And in many cases, SMEs, for example, IFC, International Finance Corporation, has special funds, credit lines for cleaner production. But the minimum, in a way, loan is 20 million. And here are our SMEs, and they need 100,000 and 500,000 and 1 million. So they have a problem to disperse their $200 million green credit line, and the SMEs never get the money. So there is some problem. Here you just see this in European Union, you see the difference just from the 70s to 2010 in labor, material, and energy productivity over the time. It's already a big difference. Now, green industry, we had to sell our approach, of course, to the governments. We want to convince them also, if they do an industrialization, maybe to start from the beginning with green industries. So we developed what we call the Green Industry Initiative, and I just already mentioned this. We have one part is the greening of existing industries, and the other one is to build up new green industries. We had a huge conference in 2009 in Manila where we discussed it with mainly countries in Asia, and we also got the commitment of 21 countries to move towards such a green industry strategy. 2011 in Tokyo and last year in China, we repeated the conference, and what I have to say, last year we got highest support from China, and at the moment UNIDO is developing together with the Ministry of Industry in China what we call a green industry strategy for China's industries. So I think in some of the countries the top government is fully aware of the problem, and they also see the opportunities. Here we have just summarized for this political discussion also, the economic, social, and environmental benefits of such an approach, which I think for you is obvious. What we also notice that in many of the countries there is some sort of a missing link between the private sector and the governments. They do not really discuss such issues, or for example, they do not discuss an industrial policy or pricing and so on together. There is some sort of a barrier. So we created together with UNEP this green industry platform, which is a voluntary multi-stakeholder partnership where we at the moment have about 200 businesses, governments, and international and civil society organizations, where we provide them a platform to discuss these issues, but where we also publish, for example, best available technology and best practice for certain sectors. The last year we produced 3 manuals for food processing, where we in a way present benchmarks for certain food processing products, how much water, energy, and so on is used in best available technology, and though companies can use this and also benchmark their performance towards, in a way, state-of-the-art performance. In this year, we are working very much on textile industry. We do together with one company, they are helping us to develop a toolkit to calculate the water footprint for wet processing in textile industry. And in parallel, we have put together all these different best practice benchmarks, and though companies can in a way calculate their own water footprint and then also compare it again with state-of-the-art. We do also a lot of capacity building in this area. In some cases now also with members of our green industry platform. They are helping us mainly also to do it, and this is why I was very much interested to hear this morning's presentation about the supply chain. I think this is a great opportunity in a way to scale up our activities if we can go through the supply chain in all these different countries. Here we see the different members we have at the moment. The companies are huge companies, Broad Group, one of the biggest private companies in China, but also a very small textile company, for example, in Sri Lanka with 50 employees. You know, green industry was green economy, where green industry is just a small pillar. Green economy is, of course, much more. It also has housing, fisheries, agriculture, forestry, transportation, whereas we are focusing on green industry was one of these results of the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012. And based on this Rio Plus 20 conference, all the members of the UN agreed to define so-called sustainable development goals. And these UN Sustainable Development Goals are at the moment, the draft is available, and it will be now negotiated by the General Assembly within the next 12 months. And I think next autumn it should be agreed by all of the states. And you can see here some of these goals have a very clear linkage to the industry. It's mainly number 9, build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Then it's number 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. And then, of course, it's also built in energy, in water, and so on, goals. So I think it will have, these goals will have a significant impact on industries in developing countries, if it is approved like this. Here, just as an example, what McKinsey calculated in terms of productivity improvement, if we would like to achieve what I mentioned before, you know, these sustainable development goals. For example, for materials, food, energy, and water, the yellow ones is the average improvement in the last 20 years, and the blue one would show what we would need to achieve per year. And I think this, of course, would be quite a challenge to increase the productivity gains per year to this one, but it would also offer huge opportunities for innovation and research and new ideas. Here is our website. If you have more questions or if you want to show what else we are doing, please visit this website, and thank you very much for your attention.